Welcome to the CryptoCounsel at Wiley. We are the podcast that decodes the most important crypto disputes in litigation and regulation. My name is Josh. I'm an international lawyer who does crypto. And while I'm sad to miss out on my normal co-host Frank Scaduto today, I am delighted to be joined by our first guest on the CryptoCounsel, Nova Daly. How are you today, Nova?
I'm doing great. Great to be here, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity to talk crypto.
I'm looking forward to it, particularly because you have the expertise on this critical national security issue we'll be discussing, a fascinating and unprecedented divestment order by the president. But before we get to that, we typically start with 3 quick bits. These are some news items in the crypto field, and I will share these and maybe have a few questions for you. Are you ready to go?
Fire away.
Just recently, the Supreme Court granted cert in a case involving NVIDIA. It's another cryptocurrency case because the question is whether certain graphics processing units, or GPUs, designed by NVIDIA, whether the revenue from those GPUs comes mostly from gaming or from cryptocurrency mining. So Nova, do you typically use your GPUs for gaming or cryptocurrency mining?
That's a fantastic question, Josh. One for which I don't know the exact answer, but I do know this. I don't do cryptocurrency mining myself. So the answer, I think, is gaming. And knowing the NVIDIA team, great folks out there, I have to say it's gaming from my side.
Okay. Second quick bit. The company Robinhood, which has been a bit in the crosshairs of the SEC lately, recent news is that they are planning to acquire a Luxembourg-based crypto exchange called Bitstamp. So Nova, how would you feel about having a Luxembourg-based crypto exchange?
Well, I know a lot of things happen in Luxembourg in terms of the business side and corporate headquartering. So I think, I guess I'd generally be comfortable with that, given its history and its business orientation. Yeah.
Comfortable with Luxembourg. Let's turn to another part of the world then. Final quick bit. The news today is that Nigeria has dropped tax charges against certain Binance executives, but money laundering charges continue to go forward. So we're going to be talking about the United States. We've mentioned a Luxembourg-based crypto exchange. Now we have some news out of Nigeria in the crypto world. If you were starting afresh with your own crypto operation, where would you put it, Nova?
Well, being a U.S. citizen and U.S. person, I'd probably put it here just so I could monitor it better. But if you're talking about a mining operation, that crypto mining operation, there's a lot of electricity that is needed for that to be sustained. It's 24/7. I might just locate it north of the border in Canada. They got a ton of hydropower, cheaper, constant, so I might go there.
Okay. Nova Daly's Canadian crypto platform. I'm looking forward to that day.
But it'd be close to the border. It wouldn't be too far afield.
Keep it in reach. That makes sense.
Within reach. I mean, it's not too far.
Well, speaking of foreign investments in crypto, we are going to be talking today about a truly unprecedented and groundbreaking decision by the U.S. government. We're going to drill into some details, but just so everyone knows what kind of expert we have here, Nova has held senior leadership positions at the U.S. Senate, in the Departments of Treasury and Commerce, and at the White House. And as I think you'll come to see, all of that experience is relevant here because we're going to be focusing on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, known inside the Beltway and to others involved in the foreign investment field as CFIUS. The news out of CFIUS is that a few weeks ago, this spring, President Joe Biden issued an executive order prohibiting the acquisition of certain real estate in Wyoming by a company called Mine One, which was ultimately majority owned by Chinese nationals. Now, there's a lot to this, and I want to take it a step at a time.
Sure.
So let's start at the beginning. What is CFIUS?
A good, strong question, an important one. What is CFIUS? The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It is not, a disease. Some people thought CFIUS was a disease, but it's not. It's a committee run by Treasury, composed of about 15 to 16 different agencies. Really only 9 are voting, and 2 others have non-voting rights. But effectively, they review foreign investments. This group, led by Treasury, review foreign investments and ownership of U.S. businesses or real estate. And they have to decide in concurrence whether to approve it, whether to require what's called mitigation. Those are steps that allow a committee to deal with national security issues, or if it's something that they don't feel they can address through national security provisions of mitigation, they can recommend that the president block the transaction. So a lot of power and a lot of duties. And in terms of how global M&A looks at it, CFIUS has become an important institution.
I might add as well a lot of bureaucracy because we have a lot of agencies on this committee.
True.
But one that you mentioned is Treasury. You are a former Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Treasury Department. What was your role with CFIUS?
So as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Investment Security and Open Investment, actually, back then, my job was to effectively run the committee, to administer the process and get decisions out of all these member agencies on where to go with these transactions. I considered myself a cat herder, effectively trying to get all these agencies in line and on the right decision path. A lot of negotiation. It was not a job where Treasury had the heavy hand and decided where things went. It really was cajoling agencies to make a decision, determine what the national security issues were, and address them or clear the transaction. So, and then during my time there, we had a new law that got passed as a result of a big investment due by Ports World, which blew up. So we had a new law back then, and my job was to implement that law in terms of regulations as well. So had a lot of different hats.
And CFIUS covers a lot of different sectors. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you did not have any potential cryptocurrency investments in your tenure under your review. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. Back then, during the Bush administration, the Bush 2, the big issue there was actually cyber. It was a cutting issue because we really hadn't delved into it. Most of the acquisitions were hard assets of mines or manufacturing, semiconductors. But really, crypto was not something we were doing back then.
Now it is. And this recent order is one of the very few in history in which the president has prohibited a transaction. Were there any other examples that were similar to that during your tenure?
Sure. And that's one of the interesting sides of CFIUS is even though the president is able to take and make a decision on whether to block a transaction, during my time there, the vast majority of transactions died at the cutting table when CFIUS went to the companies and said, I'm sorry, we are not going to allow this transaction, or we're going to recommend that the president block it. So it's your decision if you want to have the president block it or you just want to back away from the deal. And for the most part, companies just backed away. But there's a total of actually 7 transactions that have been blocked by the president. And this is the latest.
And this one now is about cryptocurrency. And that's why we're here, the CryptoCounsel. We want to unpack the crypto-specific angles of this to some extent. But CFIUS is not a crypto-only committee. It looks at a lot of different dynamics, potential red flags. And here there seem to be a few. We had an investment ultimately owned by Chinese nationals, and it was within a mile of a strategic missile base in Wyoming. So how much of this decision was driven by those factors as compared to the actual use of the property, which was cryptocurrency mining?
Yeah, this one had to deal with location. You had a foreign investor that was Chinese-owned that had decided to build this facility next to the Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. It's one of 3 strategic missile bases for the United States, so we're talking nuclear here. And, with crypto mining and cryptocurrency, you have very advanced technologies that go into being able to process the algorithms to get and mine the data for the cryptocurrencies. Most of that equipment is just processing and servers. But when you have a facility like that, you can put in other equipment that has other purposes. And I think the U.S. government was concerned that there was equipment in there that was not being or going to be used for cryptocurrency mining and was going to be used for other purposes. And that's why it decided to recommend that the president block this.
Interesting. So it does seem that there's some ambiguity in the president's decision about what exactly the concern about the technology was. And I'm going to quote it and then ask you about the meaning. So the president referred to the cryptocurrency mining operation as using, quote, equipment potentially capable of facilitating surveillance and espionage activities, end quote. I think that's DC talk for spying. And so is the president saying that cryptocurrency miners are spying on us?
That is a great question. And I don't think the president is saying cryptocurrency miners are spying on us. I'm saying for this particular instance, for this particular investment, the president has said, based on the findings of the committee, that there was or could be equipment that was also in that facilities that was being used for nefarious purposes. And frankly, the tip that came from this wasn't CFIUS finding this transaction on its own. It was a tip from an outside source, according to the New York Times. That was Microsoft, that had a facility right next to this cryptocurrency miner. And Microsoft was doing stuff for the Department of Defense. So Microsoft themselves let the committee know this being a problem. But going back to address your question, no, not all cryptocurrency mining is going to have equipment that can or would be used for the purpose of spying or espionage. But in this particular instance, that's what the committee found.
And is it that because cryptocurrency mining equipment is big and sophisticated, we get that these are high-power computers, they're going to be in a temperature-controlled warehouse using a lot of energy, but the process of cryptocurrency mining, and I've read that this really was a Bitcoin mine, it is essentially big computers guessing numbers. That's what they're trying to do. That's the hash rate. There's nothing nefarious about big computers trying to guess numbers. So is the point reading through the lines here that because there were so many big, complicated computers, there could be things hidden within the system doing other activities? Is that the idea?
Yeah, and I don't know expressly the technology or if just all the servers that are located in that facility can themselves be utilized for other purposes. But in order to really, from what I recall in terms of the intelligence, to tap into the things that would be espionage, you have to be outside of the mining enterprise. It requires seeking to or tapping into other electronic information sources or other facilities. So the mining equipment itself isn't going to do it. But if you have other specialized equipment, that could be the case. Interesting parallel or a similar transaction to this one was a deal that was blocked by the President Obama in 2012. It had to do with wind towers in Oregon, the Rawls transaction. That's one in which the president, again, took action in blocking that transaction because on top of these wind towers, certain equipment could be placed because this particular facility that got blocked was near another U.S. military facility. But equipment could be placed on top of these wind towers to effectively monitor the kind of activities that the U.S. military is doing. So now, moving it to this particular transaction, again, we have a facility that's processing a lot of data, but other equipment could be placed in that facility that would be used to take other action to tap in other electronic sources.
Is there a broader concern here? Because I think I read as well that these Bitcoin miners here, and generally in the industry, Bitcoin miners are coming from China or certainly have components from China. Does that mean that we can expect cryptocurrency mining, particularly Bitcoin mining, where you have Chinese supply chain issues? Is there going to be greater scrutiny going forward for all of this kind of mining?
Yeah, I do actually think that's going to be the case. Again, harkening back to the New York Times article, apparently, per their finding, there's at least 12 other states, including Arkansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Wyoming, where there are Chinese-owned or operated Bitcoin mines. And apparently, together, these miners use as much energy as 1.5 million homes. So not only do you have these facilities that could have other equipment, electronic equipment used to do serendipitous spying operations, but also you have a critical infrastructure issue where you have a lot of energy that's being drawn off, that if these different mining operations act in tandem, they could certainly have issues that would put grids in jeopardy, especially since the U.S. really has to improve its electric grids here in the United States.
That brings us perhaps back to this question of proximity. Here, I think, you could draw lines pretty easily with 1 mile from one of the 3 most strategic lower 48 military bases for missiles. What's the distance? How far out can they go? Should we expect a flood of cryptocurrency mining operations 5.6 miles from the base? What's the plan going forward?
Sure. So, well, it depends on the base. CFIUS has pretty clear guidelines on what facilities are sensitive. And it's in the appendix to the CFIUS regulations where they list all the facilities where real estate holdings carry certain sensitivities and a filing, the actual ownership creates a covered transaction for CFIUS purposes. For some facilities, it has to be within a mile. And if you're outside a mile, then it's not a covered transaction for CFIUS purposes. For other facilities, if you're 100 miles away or even 50 miles away, it's enough to bring it under CFIUS covered transaction rules and CFIUS jurisdiction. Now, if the facility is in an urban area, then it's outside of CFIUS jurisdiction. But if it's within an airport jurisdiction or an actual port, shipping port, then that's going to be a covered transaction. So the rules are pretty clear. There's not a lot of wiggle room to them, which means that CFIUS has to really think about what could fall outside of its jurisdiction but still be a national security issue. And one of the interesting ones was the facility, the Fufang transaction up in North Dakota, where the facility that was being constructed, a corn mill plant, was outside of CFIUS jurisdiction, but nonetheless presented a national security issue to the base, which at that time wasn't listed as a sensitive facility. So there's a lot to consider there in terms of CFIUS jurisdiction. Nonetheless, for the crypto miners themselves, need to be aware of where you're located and its sensitivity.
You probably also need to be aware of reporting issues. You mentioned that this was a public tip. If, say, an innocuous Luxembourg-based crypto miner wants to invest in a crypto mine within one of these sensitive areas, should they just go for it and see what happens? What's the alternative?
Well, I think, if they want to ensure, this is one of the things about CFIUS is that prior to the new CFIUS law, it was a voluntary process, meaning companies could choose to file or not choose. And the only repercussion for choosing not to file was that if CFIUS discovered it, it could go back and force a review and mitigate or block it. So there's always this sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of the investor. With the new rules, there are certain transactions that are mandatory, those dealing with critical technologies. But looking at the real estate world, it's not a mandatory filing. But nonetheless, given the sensitivities attached, especially the focus that was done on this particular transaction, I'd strongly suggest that any company choosing to do a crypto mining operation in the United States be aware of the CFIUS rules in terms of location. And if you can't follow the rules expressly, because sometimes they can be very complicated, and sometimes it's not just the rules that put you under CFIUS considerations. Sometimes you need a little bit more understanding and counsel. That's where counsel comes in.
You mentioned the new law in this space, which is called the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act. How does that acronym go?
It goes FIRMA.
FIRMA. It's a great one.
Yeah, being strong.
FIRMA for CFIUS, and it does seem to be hearkening more scrutiny in this space. This is the first acquisition of real estate where there was a divestment order. Do you think this is precedent that's going to be followed in more cases going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. CFIUS is, especially recently, has bolstered its enforcement guidelines and directives, effectively telling the public, look, if you have a covered transaction, especially if it's mandatory, and you don't file it, we can issue penalties, civil penalties that can be $250,000 per violation or up to the value of the transaction, and now even higher. So in instances where parties decide not to file, or they do and they're under mitigation and they violate it, the penalties are significant. And now, there's a focus on this transaction. I feel as though the committee is definitely looking at the real estate holdings. There's heightened sensitivity on the Hill. I testified before the Agricultural Committee about land holdings, farm and agricultural land holdings by foreign entities. So not only is Congress sort of taking action to address this because they see holes in the application of U.S. national security, but also states themselves are putting up laws and restrictions on foreign ownership of land holdings, not just agriculture. So it's really got to know the playing field out there. It's dynamic, it's changing, and it's at the forefront of where Congress and the administration and states themselves are.
We talked in the beginning about where companies might want to put their cryptocurrency mining operations. Power concerns are a big part of that. Regulatory certainty is a big part of that. We've advocated here in an amicus brief on this podcast for greater clarity for these regulations. But a lot of this investment involves foreign investment. This is not just U.S. entities building cryptocurrency mines in the U.S. Crypto is inherently cross-border. What should foreign investors who want to take advantage of some of the benefits of the U.S. market, what should they do to best protect themselves?
Yeah, I think the best protection is if you want to get into the space, hire a firm that understands the rules. Not only the rules in terms of crypto regulation broadly, but also the rules in terms of how the U.S. is addressing these things on national security. It's just smart. It's just smart play. And yes, of course, we're here at the law firm and, we see things in our perspective. But just from a precautionary standpoint, I have had so many clients themselves that if you just took that modicum of caution and addressed due diligence on the forefront, that ounce of caution saves a pound of, you finished the phrase. But I mean, the point is that when you address those national security issues up front, you get counsel in terms of where the rules are and guidelines, then it secures your investment for the future and you don't have these issues that can cause substantial cost and substantial penalties if you don't get it right.
And this one was really a worst case scenario because you have no voluntary reporting, you have a public tip, and then a complete divestment order. So it completely rips the rug out of a foreign investment. Rightly or wrongly, that's what happens here. What's the opposite? What's the green light look like? Let's assume a company does get the right advice and they get this approval. What are the benefits of that? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, so the benefit, there's two safe roads to go down. You get the advice of where to put something or facility that's not going to be in the jurisdiction of CFIUS or create a national security concern. The facility goes up, you run it straight, you're safe and you're on safe grounds. And the only thing you have to keep your eyes on are where the SEC or other regulatory bodies are going with regulation broadly. The other lane is it has to go on a site or at a facility that's going to be in proximity to a sensitive site. And, if you're an investor of good standing internationally, you can go through the CFIUS process, file it. Once you're done, you're cleared and you're a known entity with CFIUS. And you can grow your business here in the United States knowing that you're a known entity and trusted and cleared entity in the United States.
A cryptocurrency mining business?
Even a cryptocurrency mining business. Even though, let's say, even if it's a Chinese entity, obviously there's a lot of issues there, but and this is what I used to tell my Chinese counterparts in the Chinese government when we'd have discussions is, look, go there out front and if it is a covered transaction, meet with CFIUS and show that there can be a trust developed there. And that's a big part of it. Governance is trust. A big part of governance is trust, especially in the national security realm.
I think one of the ironies of this is that what you and what CFIUS and what we are advocating for is a level of transparency, clarity up front, which is in a way exactly what the blockchain technology is trying to do as well. And there's the irony that here you have a cryptocurrency mining operation designed to be transparent that is so big and complicated, nevertheless, that you could be hiding something in it.
That's right. That's right. When you have a big facility, you can put a lot of different equipment in there. So it's best to be a trusted entity and a known entity through that process and get good counsel before getting there and putting the shovel in the ground.
We've talked about CFIUS, FIRMA, good acronyms, good national security guidance. What's your final word on cryptocurrency, Nova?
My final word on cryptocurrency is that, it's gone. Look, I'm a neophyte compared to you, Josh, in terms of knowing this world, but I've seen it from sort of the outside. I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to continue to grow, especially with blockchain and it being the ability to have a trusted platform where there is value to the currencies that are available. It's going to continue to grow. And I think people have to keep, especially with any new growth area in the world of finance, you have to keep close tabs because not only the U.S. government, but also foreign governments are deciding how they're going to address and deal with this new valued system. And so regulations are going to change. So the more you're engaged, the more you get good counsel, and then also advocate for the good policies for it. I know Coinbase and other operators out there do this. They engage the U.S. government, whether it's the administration or Congress, to educate them in terms of the platform and its applications, but also to help steer the right rules for the platforms themselves. So the point is be engaged, get good counsel, and help yourself by helping the policy and decision makers build the right rules around your platform.
It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to thrive, just maybe not within a mile of a strategic missile base.
Let's not put it there.
Well, thank you so much, Nova, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure hearing your insights. And thanks to everyone for listening to the Crypto Council.
Josh, thank you so much. Great to be here.